Hello, everyone, and welcome to Registrar Corp's webinar on GFSI certification. My name is Betsy Shao, and I'm today's moderator. Today's presentation will conclude with a live question and answer session. If we run out of time, we're also happy to respond to your questions by email. You may submit a written question anytime during the webinar by using the Ask a Question feature in the top center of your webinar screen. A recorded copy of this presentation will be sent to all registrants. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Cynthia Weber holds a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology and is a certified ISO 22000 and FSSC 22000 lead assessor. She has performed certification audits nationwide. She's also a lead instructor for FDA's preventive controls rules for human and animal food. Ms. Weber acts as Registrar Corp's Director of Food Safety Training and Curriculum. She has developed various food safety training and documentation tools which have been utilized around the world since 2001. Cynthia, would you like to go ahead and begin?
Yes, thank you. Good morning and welcome to our GFSI 101 webinar. Thanks so much for joining for all of you for joining us. As Betsy mentioned, I'm Cynthia Weber and I'm here today to help you get some answers to your questions about GFSI and the related food certification schemes. I will spend about 30 to 40 minutes explaining GFSI and then answer your questions. So feel free to enter your questions as you think of them while I'm presenting, so we can get to those at the end of the session. Let's see here. One moment. Get my slide to advance here. Okay. Well, I am betting that most of you joining us today are here because one or more of your customers is asking for GFSI recognized food safety certifications. And that's because so many, even most of the large retailers and multinational food manufacturers are asking that their suppliers are certified to a GFSI recognized scheme. This means that it's really becoming a prerequisite or a must to do business with these organizations. Food processors, manufacturers, and packaging manufacturers, and other types of facilities in the food industry are all finding that more and more customers want to see this type of certification. So this request is getting more and more common. This morning, we'll be discussing GFSI and certification, what it is, what it does, and how it can help you. I also want to give you an overview of what you need to do to achieve certification. We will talk about GFSI itself, the benefits of GFSI recognized certifications, an overview of the requirements, steps to implementation, the costs and timeline, and how Registrar Corp can help you. So first, we're going to start out with GFSI. GFSI is the Global Food Safety Initiative. They are an organization made up of food safety experts from around the world working to make safe food. And you can find their website at mygfsi.com. GFSI is a global organization. It was created in the year 2000 to help address the issue of food safety across the globe. It was an initiative of the Consumer Goods Forum and has grown into a global multi-stakeholder movement. It's composed of the world's leading food safety experts from retail, manufacturing, and food service companies. If you look at the board, you'll see representation from major food companies and retailers like Costco, Amazon, Danone, Dole, McDonald's, Walmart, and more. The list goes on. So they're truly industry leaders. And their goal is safe food for consumers everywhere. One of the ways they're working towards that goal is to work to harmonize food safety certification schemes. There has been historically a wide variety of food safety certifications across the globe. The problem was they're based on many different criteria, and this meant that there were also a lot of differences in the programs and what they meant to food safety, really resulting in a lack of trust or recognition of the programs. One certification really didn't mean the same thing as another food certification, so people might only trust the ones they know. One customer would ask for one certification and another customer would ask for a different certification. So food companies were really stuck doing a lot of certifications or a lot of different audits. And GFSI stepped in and they really established the goal of once certified, recognized everywhere. And they would achieve this by harmonizing the food safety certification schemes. They would recognize certification schemes that met certain criteria and reduce the need for multiple audits by customers and certification bodies. This GFSI benchmarking process is now the most widely recognized in the food industry worldwide. So, how does this work? Well, GFSI set up benchmarking criteria for the certification schemes. The first criteria were made back in 2001 by retailers, and the requirements have been continually updated since then. They've been updated numerous times. They're updated when new information arises, when new regulations arise, and when new food safety trends emerge. And a good example of that was updating after the Food Safety Modernization Act came into law. They update their benchmarking criteria, and then the certification schemes need to update to match those new criteria. So that's how they maintain, they know that the certification schemes are good and valid. So they evaluate the certification program, for example, an SQF or an FSSC, and they make sure that it meets all the benchmarking requirements. If it does, they become a GFSI recognized certification program or scheme. And this is why your customers ask for a GFSI recognized certification. When you are certified to one of these standards, they know that you are certified to a robust certification that really means something. So it provides them good assurance that you have a food safety management system in place that's going to protect them from risk. So you may be asked the question, are you GFSI certified? It's a common question, but now you know that there is no GFSI certification, but only GFSI recognized certification. GFSI does not certify the companies, but they recognize certification schemes. So really, if you're asked that question, it's not really, are you GFSI certified, but are you certified to a GFSI recognized scheme? How does the recognition work? Well, the benchmarking requirements are based on some existing standards, such as ISO and Codex Alimentarius, which are internationally recognized. They aren't new requirements, they didn't recreate the wheel, but they based it on good international recognized requirements that they thought were critical aspects of a food safety management system and a certification program. So we'll take a broad look at the requirements. The program must include HACCP. So the certification requirements must include a requirement for HACCP. And the HACCP program must be based on the Codex HACCP principles. So any one of these certification schemes is going to ask you to follow those principles and build your HACCP system. The program must also include a food safety management system. These are management systems aspects so that the certification scheme knows that you are managing your food safety in the way that you would manage your business. So this would require things like a food safety policy, evidence of management commitment and management responsibility for the system, internal audits, corrective actions, controlling nonconformities, things that you might see if you're familiar with an ISO system or other management system. They also address specific food issues like food defense, food fraud, and allergens. So you must have the whole food safety management system in place that meets the criteria of the standard. The last step of requirements is really the good manufacturing practices and prerequisite programs. So all of the certification schemes will include requirements to implement the appropriate good manufacturing practices for your industry sector. They have different documents that apply to different industry sectors to make sure that your facility is suitable for making safe food. And then there are also requirements in the benchmarking for the management of the scheme itself. So there's requirements for what the certification body will need to do to ensure auditor competence. There will be reporting requirements, and they are required to have an integrity program. So part of the GFSI benchmarking is making sure first that all those criteria are in the standard, but then also that the certification program owner, the CPO, has a good system in place for managing the program, for making sure that the auditors are competent, ensuring auditor consistency, and then having an integrity program that actually goes out and measures and makes sure that auditors are competent, the certification audits are happening correctly, things like that. So, assuring that the certification body is doing their part in addition to the requirements for GFSI benchmarking. If you visit the GFSI website, you will see a list of the different standard, the certification schemes that are benchmarked. So these are this is a picture of the uh, programs that are benchmarked, and they are the recognized schemes. It is important to know that there are many different scopes for certification. Not all programs cover all scopes. For example, you'll see some GAP, Global GAP, Asia GAP, Canada GAP. Some of those focus more on the agricultural part, the farming. But if you get into BRC, SQF, IFS, or FSSC 22000, those have a broad range of food processing scopes, and they also include production of food packaging. So as you look at this list when you're going to choose a certification program, you will want to make sure that they cover the scope that your facility falls into. Another criteria that might help you choose, you might ask what your customer uses or if they have a preference. But again, because these are GFSI recognized, they will be widely accepted really globally. You might notice that ISO 22000 is not listed here. ISO 22000 is not a GFSI recognized certification. And that is because, first, it did not meet the benchmarking requirements. It didn't include all aspects of the GFSI benchmarking. And also, it did not have a scheme owner to manage it. So that was just some things. It's a good standard, but it didn't quite meet what GFSI was looking for. And ISO is run a little bit differently. They don't have a scheme owner, someone to manage the whole scheme. So that is why FSSC 22000 was formed. The organization is the scheme owner, FSSC 22000, so they can manage the program, and they added some additional requirements to meet benchmarking requirements. So some things like food defense and allergen management that weren't specifically called out in ISO 22000. So if you were thinking of ISO 22000 as a certification, you would benefit from moving to FSSC instead because it is GFSI recognized. So you'll be sure that it will be recognized by some of those big companies or retailers or manufacturers that you might be looking for to add to your customer base. You'll also notice some regional preferences with these schemes. An example would be SQF is popular in the United States. FSSC 22000 and BRC are very global. FSSC 22000 is interesting because it's a management system standard, not a product or process standard. And that just means it's managed a little bit differently as far as audits. It's more like ISO 9000 if you're familiar with that system. And it uses the ISO 22000 standard for the management system requirements. So it fits well with other ISO management systems if you have some of those in your organization, again, like ISO 9000. There are some internal benefits to building a food safety management system and obtaining GFSI recognized certification. You can think of it this way: if you want to improve food safety in your facility or reduce the risk, you could pay for an expensive expert to tell you what should be addressed by your food safety system, or you could use the requirements in one of these GFSI recognized certification. Because we saw those experts on the board, we know those food safety experts are out there determining what needs to be in these benchmark systems. So you're really benefiting from all that work. These experts have kind of done that work for you, determining exactly what should be included in your system. So, building one of these food safety management systems really allows your company to effectively manage the food safety hazards. The GFSI benchmarking document identifies the key elements, the requirements, and the current best practices of a food safety management system. And then that's carried out to the requirements in the certification program that you can follow. External benefits include increasing your market reach. Uh, Again, we talked about it really being a prerequisite or a must do to sell to some of these big retailers. So, having that certification means you're able to sell to those retailers or manufacturers because of your certification. And likely, if you have not been asked to become certified yet, you probably will be soon. Uh, and another benefit of having the certification is that you are listed on the site. So FSSC or SQF, or they list their certified organizations. So if customers are looking for suppliers that are certified, you're listed on that site. So that's a benefit for your marketing as well. And finally, it really helps prepare you for regulations. A good example, again, is the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA. Companies that already had a food safety management system in place were well prepared for the preventive controls rule. They had a lot of the pieces in place. The GFSI recognized certifications are already based on prevention. So when FSMA came in, they were already managing things through prevention. And the systems in place addressed many of the requirements of FSMA. The schemes are also working hard to help companies address the requirements of FSMA. And an example there is that when you have your certification audit, most of the programs now have FSMA addendums that you can add to your certification audit so that you can demonstrate to your customers that you're meeting the requirements of FSMA, that you're controlling their hazards. And that's a big requirement of FSMA when people are looking at their suppliers. So that can help you work through that hurdle. If you've decided to pursue a certification, how do you begin to go down that road? Let's take a look at some of the steps. The starting point is to select which of those programs you are going to use. And I talked a bit about the different programs and the different scopes. You will want to make sure that the certification that you choose has support in your area as well. So you can look at the scopes, you can look at who your customer might be using, if they have a preference. Um, and you will also want to make sure that there are resources in your area. And what I mean by this is that you want to make sure there's a certification body that covers your area for the standard that you choose. So an example would be if we visit the FSSC 22000 page, we can see that they have 128 certification bodies around the world. So then if our facility is located in Italy, we can do a search and see that there's 16 certification bodies listed that cover Italy, and one has an office in Italy, which can be convenient. It's not necessarily a requirement. Different countries will cover various countries. But if you do the same for SQF, you can see that there's 4 certification bodies that cover Italy. So you want to make sure that you do have coverage in your area. You are going to be able to get a certification audit in. And you might want to contact those registrars just to see for logistics and make sure they have an auditor that fits into your scope that's going to be able to come out and audit you. So those are a few things you want to look at as you choose your different, which certification program you want to go with. But again, the benefit of GFSI there is that all of these are benchmark programs. So as long as you find one that covers your scope, your certification will be well recognized across the globe by all the big players in the industry. Next, you need to learn about the requirements of the certification program that you choose. So even though they're all benchmarked and they have a similar base of requirements, the different programs are different. They're organized different. They might have different specifics or details in the requirements. So you do need to learn about the certification program that you choose. The person leading your implementation project will probably need to know the most about it or know the standard or the requirements in the most depth. But management and the food safety team or HACCP team should also understand the requirements. You really don't want the project to fall on one person to implement. The more people that are involved, the more ownership there is for the program. And this is really, you can take this opportunity to build it to really build the food safety culture as you build the food safety system. So involving more people really helps get that ownership. More people are involved. They feel more connected to the program. They understand the program better. So it works well to train the project leader, maybe more than one, depending on how big your organization is, but project leader or leaders on the detail of the requirements and how to implement the program, and then train the food safety team and management on the overall requirements so they'll understand the system and have an understanding of what the food safety system will look like once you build it. And management needs an understanding of the project so they can provide the resources for development of the system. It's hard to get this all done if management doesn't understand why you need resources to build it. Another consideration is employee training. They don't necessarily need to know all of the details of the requirements because you'll build your system and then they'll be trained on your procedures and learn to follow your processes and procedures, but they need to have some training. So if you don't already have a program in place, if they aren't already trained, they should be trained on food safety and hygiene, GMP requirements, food defense and allergen management in your facility, things where they can have a direct impact on food safety. And then those that are responsible for specific food safety tasks, maybe they operate equipment at a CCP or other control, they will need training on those as well, but that's more specific to your facility. The next step is to really implement and document the requirements. This is definitely the biggest part of the project. The certification scheme that you choose will have a document with requirements, so either a standard or a code, and that will outline all of the elements of the system that must be in place. And because you choose a GFSI certification, this will include all of the requirements in the benchmark documents. And so these requirements, they include HACCP, as we mentioned earlier. There will definitely be requirements for management, including defining the organizational structure, providing evidence of commitment to the system, establishing a food safety policy and objectives, providing resources, and reviewing the system for effectiveness and keeping the system effective. There's also a requirement to document the system and have document control. And so that's why we say implement and document the requirements. And the documentation requirements will vary a little bit from standard to standard. Some require specific documents. Some leave it a little more open and you decide what to document. But in any case, you will need to have documentation so that you can keep your system effective. So wherever you need procedures or documented processes to make sure that process runs well, documents will be required. There are significant requirements for operational control, things like traceability, control of monitoring and measuring, controlling nonconformances or nonconforming product, and I had mentioned food defense, allergen management, and more. So those are a lot of your operational systems. There will be quite a bit of requirements to control things in your operations. And then in addition to that, there's those management systems aspects like corrective action, internal audits, holding management review meetings where they review the effectiveness of the system, things like that, just to name a few. But there's the management system aspects that, again, you have to develop and implement. And then finally, the certification that you choose will have requirements for GMPs or prerequisite programs. And these are the programs that are put in place to make sure that the facility environment is capable of making safe food. So they include requirements for the facility and for personnel, like personnel behavior practices in production. So you will need to put in practices to address all of these requirements, and you may find that you have to make improvements or changes to your facility or your grounds or equipment if they don't comply. So that's something to take into consideration when you're planning and thinking of your timeline and your budget. What is the condition of your facility, and is it going to comply with those GMPs or prerequisite programs? And then as you implement, you will need to document these processes according to the certification, the requirements of the certification that you choose. So I mentioned, some certification programs call out more procedures that are actually, specifically required than others. But really, it all comes down to you must document where, if you don't have a document, you're not going to be able to manage that process. So you do need to document your processes for your food safety management system. Once you have your system built, then you need to run it for a little while before you're ready for certification. So again, take that into account when you're going through the program. Once you have the system built, you're not immediately ready for your certification audit. You want to run your system. You want to do internal audits. You want to hold management review where you're looking at how the system is working, because that helps you catch things that are not conforming. It helps you find those nonconformances and correct them before your certification audit. So you're going to have a much better experience at your certification audit if you've done your internal audits, and even if you've done maybe a couple run-throughs of audits. So you do an audit, do corrective actions, and do another audit. So you'll take corrective action on what you find and prepare. That'll help you prepare for certification because you're able to find it before the certification auditor finds it. So that's always a good thing. Then comes your third-party certification audit, the exciting part. These initial third-party audits are done in two parts. There's a document review and then an audit of the facility and processes. And each certification scheme and even different certification bodies will handle these a little bit differently. But there's a two-step system, whether it's, the document review, some people will do it off-site, some still like to do it on-site. But it's done in two parts. So the document review gives an auditor a chance to see what you've planned. So what have you planned for your management system? You've documented all that. They go through the procedures to see what meets the requirements of the standard or code. And at this point, then they can let you know if there's some holes in your system, places where you don't meet the requirements, so you can take action and fix those before the on-site certification audit. During the certification audit, so the first step is usually called document review. During the certification audit, that second step, the auditor will definitely be on site. They will be auditing against the standard and against your processes. They are auditing against what you've planned and documented. They will be in your facility checking records and observing processes and finding gaps or nonconformances. And some audits are scored. This is another place where there's some differences in those certification schemes. BRC and SQF assign scores based on the number and severity of the findings. There's major and minor findings and critical findings. Some are not scored. FSSC is an example of that. It's a pass-fail audit. They identify minor and major nonconformances that require corrective action and possibly a follow-up audit, or maybe even a critical nonconformance that means the facility will need another audit. But typically, if you're dealing with an audit and there's some findings, then you have the chance to explain what's your planned corrective action, tell the certification body, either close out those nonconformances, or if they're a little more long-term, you give them your plan. And once the auditor approves all of your corrective actions, then the report is finalized and you are awarded certification. So some variation on how different certification schemes handle all of that. But again, that's where GFSI can play a role, because GFSI has come in and made requirements in their benchmarking document for reporting and for nonconformances. So we do get some similarity, even if they manage it different. They're similar in what they achieve with the different certification programs. So the auditor will document the audit. If there's nonconformances, the facility will have time to respond and take corrective action. Once the corrective actions are approved, the report is sent off to technical review. So there's still another step. The auditor writes the report, but there's a technical review step, again, to make sure that all the requirements for the audit were met as well. All the documentation is right. And it's important to know about that process because it can take several weeks for audit reports to be finalized. And that means you do not receive your certificate immediately after the audit. So it's something to be aware of and take into consideration if you have a specific deadline or goal in mind for obtaining that certificate. Let's give you a little bit of idea about costs and timelines. As you can imagine, this can really vary widely depending on the size and complexity of your organization, as well as the status of your current system. Some people just have more in place than others, so it's just not, you might not have as far to go to get there. So very dependent on your own facility. But there are three types of costs that you will need to consider. There's the training costs. You need to learn about those requirements. There's the implementation costs for building the whole system and getting it all documented. And then the certification itself, paying the certification body. So as we discussed earlier, plan on training the project leader, the food safety team, and management. There's a variety of options for this. We'll talk about some at the end that we can provide you, but you might choose to have online training. That's getting popular, especially with the current situation, but it saves on travel. It's a nice, effective way. It's convenient. Otherwise, there's options. You might choose to have a trainer come in and present training at your site. That can be good because it can be very tailored to your specific organization. Or you might send your people to a public course. There's training organizations. Most of the certification schemes might have approved approved training bodies or organizations, so you might check there. So they offer the public courses that you might want to send your folks out to. The online option is usually the most convenient and cost effective. The next thing to consider is the implementation costs. It does take time and it takes up your in-house resources as you implement this. So you need to plan for that. Many facilities hire consultants to come in and help with the implementation, and that external knowledge may be very useful. And again, it kind of depends on what knowledge you have in-house. If you feel you need to reach out to that consultant, or if you have some knowledge in-house, consulting does tend to be an expensive option. There's also the challenge of finding a consultant in your area. But even if you don't hire a consultant, you're still going to have costs of implementation. It's going to take your time, your internal time and resources to design and implement and document the system. There's also some online resources such as templates and tools that can help you through that part of the process, and I'll give you some examples at the end as well. And then finally, there's the cost of the certification itself, the audit, the auditor, and the accreditation fees. And the larger the facility or the more HACCP plans you have in place, the longer the audit will be, and it will get more expensive. So the audit costs are based on how many audit days the auditor has to stay there. And that is based on a standard calculation. Again, there's some guidelines in the certification schemes on what they have to follow. So they will take a look at how many square feet your facility has. They will look at how many employees you have and how many HACCP plans you have. And they will estimate the amount of time that it will take to audit your facility. And there is the cost of the initial audit. We talked about the document review and then the on-site audit. There's usually some accreditation fees and certification fees that they also have to charge. And then you need to consider the ongoing costs. So these programs will have the initial certification audit, and then they will have uh, annual surveillance or follow-up certification audit. So basically, you're going to see the auditor come by at least once a year or so. So those costs are things to consider. Next, you will need to consider your timeline. And the implementation timeline, again, it's going to vary based on your own situation. I would say the average is 9 to 12 months. So this is not a quick process. It's not something that, Costco says, can you get GFSI certification and you're going to have it by the end of the month. It's just not going to happen. You need to take into account all of the implementation pieces, the training, the implementation, the documenting, then making sure that your system is up and running. Just because you put a documented procedure in doesn't mean that people are following it and that you have all the pieces in place, you're collecting all the records. So you need a little bit of time to do that. And then after you feel that your system is fully up and running, you want to run it for a little while and do internal audits, management review, so you can really catch any holes and prepare for that certification audit. And then your certification audit takes time as well. So as you plan your timeline, you want to reach out to your certification body and discuss scheduling the audit. It can take time to get on the audit calendar. Sometimes the the certification bodies can be very busy or booked up. You also need to consider that you need to get an auditor that's in your scope. So getting the right auditor scheduled can sometimes take a little bit of time. So plan on that as well if you have a goal for when you want to be certified. The good news is that we can help. We have some nice tools. I mentioned some online training. Sometimes that is a great option to go with. It's very convenient, on demand. We have packages that provide you with in-depth training on the requirements for your project leader, along with templates to help you with designing and documenting your system. We have training for your food safety team and management. We have internal auditor training and employee training programs. And those are all online, on demand. You can come and go as you please. You can always pick up in the training where you left off. So very convenient option with busy schedules and kind of eliminating the need to travel and go sit in a group for a couple of days. Our templates are fully written procedures that describe the processes to meet the requirements of the standard. And those are provided in Microsoft Word and Excel. So we have templates and forms. And they document a complete compliance system. But of course, you need to customize those for your own system. But they provide a good foundation. It's very hard to just start from a blank page. So these give you a description of a process that's fully compliant, and then you go in, because they're in Microsoft Word and Excel, you just make those your own. You start making changes so it suits your organization. So that is a way to help you through the process. So I hope that we can help you reach your goal of certification. And what I want to do now is take a look at some of your questions and see what I can answer for you. Let's see. Why is GFSI required? BRC, IFS, ISO certifications are all credible globally and recognized certification. Again, there is no GFSI certification. So if you have BRC, IFS, or FSSC, those are all recognized. But again, the reason that it is required is that these big suppliers want to know that you are certified to a program that is going to meet all of the requirements that they feel are necessary to give them the confidence in your certification. Another question, just to confirm, HACCP, GMP, and SQF are required altogether. SQF includes HACCP and GMP. So if you are SQF certified, you have a HACCP and a GMP system in place. So really the requirement, you've met the GFSI requirement or the requirement for a GFSI scheme by getting SQF certified, and that includes the HACCP and GMP. If you are audited based on ISO 22000 by a GFSI CB certification body, then is this recognized by GFSI? No, because ISO 22000 is not a GFSI recognized standard. And again, it's a great standard. It's used worldwide. It has really broad applicability from farm to fork. But for GFSI, they had specific requirements. Some of them that ISO didn't meet was that the ISO documents do not include a requirement for the PRPs. The PRP document is separate. It's a technical specification, not a standard. So there were just some reasons like that. I won't go into the nitty gritty, but there's some reasons like that ISO is not recognized. However, if you are ISO 22000 certified, you are not very far away from getting an FSSC certification. So if you're being asked to have a recognized standard, and your ISO 22000, I would recommend transitioning over to FSSC 22000. Why do big customers such as Costco require certificates from only specific auditing companies and not just any auditing company? That I'm not sure. I mean, in general, the overall market kind of direction is to have a GFSI recognized standard, as long as the standard owner like BRC recognizes that certification body. In general, it should be accepted, but I can't really speak for a specific person at Costco. I suppose maybe they have a preference. Let's see. Which GFSI certification is most suitable? Again, all of them are recognized, but you really need to look at your own situation and determine which standard is going to, maybe which is prevalent in your industry, which your customers prefer. But again, the whole goal was that if you have any of these GFSI certifications, they would be recognized. So they should be recognized worldwide all the way through. Let's see. Are there countries where FSSC is valid or BRC or IFS is valid? They're valid worldwide. It will really depend on, it always comes down to what your customer is asking for. But they're GFSI recognized, so they are GFSI recognized worldwide. This is an interesting question. Why are GFSI recognized certifications not recognized by the FDA? Well, there are two different things. There's these market-driven certifications that are GFSI, and then there is the FDA FSMA regulation. And the FDA FSMA regulations has some specifics that aren't in the GFSI standards, and they are just expecting companies to comply with the rule, and then really the GFSI standards are market driven. So the GFSI standard owners, the BRCs, SQFs, FSSC, are in close contact. They keep working with the FDA and trying to move closer and closer together so we can get more, use the GFSI standards more and more for the approval of suppliers and things like that. But that's why they come out with things like a FSMA addendum to help customers show that an audit covered all of the FDA requirements. Do we have a cost sheet for the online training process? Yes, visit our website and the costs are clearly outlined there. So I would visit and take a look. I think you'll find it's very cost effective. Let's see. Thanks for the steps mentioned as part of a 9 to 12 month goal for obtaining certification. Would you say the first 3 months are important for internal training? Yes, definitely. I would say all that focuses up on front and put your efforts in training on those first 3 months so that people understand what they need to do and understand the whole process as far as the requirements. The fundamental differences between FSSC and ISO 22000, again, and which is better, which should we take? The FSSC uses the ISO 22000 standard and builds on it so that it's GFSI recognized. Let me see if we have a few questions on the online training and costs. Here we have the cost for you. We do have an introductory course there. We have a complete training package that's great for your project manager. And then we have a premium package where you really pull in all of the training that you need for training your both your project manager, your employees, your management team, your HACCP team, like I mentioned. The training and tools are available for each step of that implementation that we mentioned. And we do have a discount as well that you can use from this webinar. Let's see. Let me going through questions here. Between HACCP and FSSC 22000, which is better? FSSC includes HACCP. So in order to have an FSSC 22000 system, you will have a HACCP system in place. So that would be FSSC 22000 would be better. It would be a food safety management system, not just a HACCP plan. So FSSC would include it. Do you need to document all procedures for SQF? SQF in the standard or in the code will specify places where it's mandatory that you have a procedure, but you also need to have procedures in place where a lack of procedure would cause a lack of control of a process. So SQF calls out specific procedures. Does GFSI recognize all levels of IFS, BRC, SQF? You have to look at the individual schemes. Some of the schemes have a more basic entry level that is not necessarily recognized. So you need to check. And again, you can go to mygfsi.com and check out the specifics. This says we have a food FSMS certificate. Do we need a GFSI certificate? Again, it's a market-driven standard, so no one is saying that you There's no regulatory aspects or anything that say you have to have a GFSI recognized certificate, but that's what's becoming, in demand throughout the industry. Hi, if I want to export product to the US, do I need this recognition? Again, it will depend on your customer, but a big majority of the retailers in the US are looking for this type of certification. I'm not sure which certification body is best for my workplace. Is there a breakdown? Once you choose a certificate program, then you will want to um, talk to different certification bodies and find out, who can get you on the schedule, who has auditors that are qualified in your scope. So you have to do a little bit of research there to find the best certification body. But on the websites for the certification program, they'll have a link to the certification bodies that are approved for their program. Let's see. I think the other questions are fairly specific to people. And any other general questions on the GFSI? We have a question about getting a demo of the training, so you could contact us directly and we can talk a little bit more about that. To your knowledge, how are CBs handling audits today? They have all needed to address the whole corona situation. And what they've done is they have, for the current certifications, most people are not auditing right now. So for the current certifications, they are extending certificates by a maximum of 6 months. And with that, they're pushing out audits about 6 months based on risk assessment. So they're looking at the companies, they're doing a risk assessment to make sure that they don't feel there's a risk by pushing out the audits, and they're pushing them out 6 months. So for planning, you need to take that into account. I think that there might be some, difficulties scheduling once everyone's getting going again. They're going to need to get all the current certifications, all those audits up to date. So I would plan ahead and try to start talking to the CBs early to try and get on their schedule for that scheduling to make sure that it's not delayed too much. Is ISO 22018 recognized by GFSI? No, you really need to move up to FSSC 22000 in order to get that GFSI recognition. But again, if you've got ISO 22000 in place, it's not, you're very close. You just need to move up to FSSC. They have a few more requirements. Let's see. Does GFSI have rules on customers requiring a GFSI scheme? They don't. Again, all of this is market driven. So in the end, your customer is the one who gets to decide what they're going to require. So it says here, we still end up getting 3 audits. But the goal, and again, it's kind of falls on all of us to educate customers, educate people that what a GFSI recognized standard means. So you've learned about it today. It's possible that the person in the purchasing department who's asking for your certification is only familiar with BRC and they don't know about FSSC. They don't realize that they're benchmarked and therefore, um, equally accepted is the goal. And so we keep working towards that, but there's still people confused on it. Let's see. If I take your training, will I still need to source a registrar? Yes. So our training will provide you with the tools to prepare for certification. So the training will teach you what's in the standard. The templates and forms will help you design and document your system. The internal auditor training will help train your auditors so they can conduct those audits, and that all helps you prepare for certification. but then you need to become certified by having your audit from a certification body. So certification bodies are the only ones that can give out those certificates. What GFSI recognized certification do you need for my business for importing and exporting? Again, any of those GFSI certifications should be recognized, but if you have a specific customer, you might check with them. But again, GFSI recognized means it should be recognized everywhere. So I think the big companies, the Costco's, the Walmarts, they recognize that. They even sit on the board of GFSI. But check with your customers because you might need to educate them on what a GFSI recognized certification is, and that, if you have SQF and they're asking you for BRC, you might need to educate them and say, I have SQF or I have FSSC, and it is an equivalent standard. Is there another organization like GFSI, or is it unique? It's unique in the food industry. So it is really the benchmark, the gold standard for certification in the food industry. It's definitely the way everyone is going. Okay, well, I appreciate your attention and your questions, and I've enjoyed having you all here today. I am going to turn it back over to Betsy.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that great presentation. Again, I'd like to announce that we will be sending a recorded copy of this webinar and a PDF copy of the presentation to all of you. And you are welcome to send us additional questions anytime by email to training@registrarcorp.com. And this concludes our presentation. And thank you so much for joining us today.